The Jam. March 12, 1940. 6:47 a.m. Canton, Ohio. The factory floor is already awake. Steel rollers hum in low, steady rhythms. Overhead belts slap and hiss. The air smells of oil, hot metal, and cold morning breath pulled in through half-open loading doors. A foreman's boots strike concrete, sharp, fast, then slow. Something is wrong. A machine coughs once, then stops. Another line falters, its whine dropping into an uneven groan. Men glance up from lathes and grinders, hands still gloved, eyes narrowing. A press operator kills his motor. The sudden quiet spreads like a stain, rolling down the production hall in patches. Silence in a place built to never be silent. At Station 14, a wooden crate sits open. Inside, empty paper wrapping. No steel spheres. No mirror-bright bearings ready for assembly. Just a stenciled inventory card clipped to the side, stamped in red pencil. Back-ordered. A supervisor steps closer, reads it twice, then once more as if the words might change. He exhales slowly through his nose. Across the floor, a telephone rings. Keeps ringing. This is the Timken plant, one of the most important bearing manufacturers in the United States. And on this morning, deep in America's industrial heartland, production has begun to choke. Outside, a freight train rolls past the factory fence, steam rising, wheels clattering confidently on steel rails. The country still moves. For now. Inside, men gather around clipboards. A line lead mutters numbers under his breath. Another checks a bin, then another, then a third. Each comes up the same. Empty. Ball bearings are small. They fit in the palm of a hand. They don't roar like engines or flash like aircraft. But remove them and nothing turns. A machinist wipes his hands on a rag already black with grease. Where's the next shipment? He asks no one in particular. No answer. In an office overlooking the floor, a window rattles as a delivery truck idles outside. The plant manager, jacket still on, phone pressed tight to his ear, stares through the glass at his men standing idle below. Yes, he says. I understand that. Pause. No, that won't work. He turns away from the window. On his desk lie telegrams from Detroit, Buffalo, Seattle. Each one urgent. Each one asking the same question in different words. When can you ship? Across the Atlantic, Europe is already burning. German panzer divisions are rolling, fast and smooth, their tracks driven by thousands of precisely machined components. British factories run night shifts under blackout curtains. France is mobilizing. Every nation at war has learned the same lesson the hard way. Industrial friction kills. The United States is not yet in the fight. Not officially. But American factories are already feeding the storm, through contracts, exports, and quiet preparation. Airframes, truck axles, turbines, naval mounts. All of it depends on rotation without failure. All of it depends on ball bearings. Back on the floor, a young quality inspector kneels to check a spindle that never should have stopped. He spins it by hand. It grinds, uneven and resistant. Without bearings, the tolerances don't matter. Precision becomes useless. A whistle blows, not the shift change. Something else. A signal improvised in the moment. Men cluster near the foreman's station. Some lean against machines. Others sit on crates meant to be filled by now. No one jokes. No one smokes. They listen. The foreman clears his throat. We're holding here, he says. Temporary. Temporary is a fragile word. In Cleveland, a purchasing agent slams a ledger shut. In Detroit, an automotive executive circles a date on his calendar and draws a hard line through it. In Washington, a junior analyst at the War Department files a report upward, unsure who will read it first. Bearing inventories critically low. No headlines yet. No radio bulletins. Just delays. Missed quotas. Quiet alarms ringing in places most Americans will never see. At Timken headquarters, engineers huddle over blueprints spread across a long table. The drawings are meticulous, cross-sections, load ratings, steel compositions down to fractions of a percent. One engineer taps a pencil against the margin, faster and faster. We can't stretch this, he says. Physics doesn't negotiate. A senior executive listens without interrupting. He is not looking at the drawings. He's looking past them, toward rail lines, ports, oceans. Toward sources that no longer answer cables. The problem is no longer theoretical. It's here. On the floor. In the empty crates. In the silence between machines that should never stop. If bearings do not arrive, production will slow. If production slows, contracts will break. If contracts break, the industrial chain fractures. And once that happens, restarting it is not as simple as flipping a switch. Outside, the morning sun climbs higher, glinting off factory windows and smokestacks. From a distance, everything looks normal. Smoke still rises. Trains still pass. America still appears strong. But inside the Timken plant, the first crack has already formed. And the men who see it know something else too. This is not a delay. It's a countdown. The invisible chokehold. March 12, 1940. 9:18 a.m. Washington, D.C. The corridors of the War Department smell faintly of floor polish and cigarette smoke. Typewriters chatter in overlapping rhythms, keys snapping like distant rifle fire. A young lieutenant hurries down the hall clutching a thin manila folder, its edges already soft from nervous handling. Inside the folder is a single-page summary. No diagrams. No dramatics. Just numbers. Imported bearing steel, delayed. Domestic inventories, insufficient. Projected shortfall, catastrophic. He stops outside an office marked Industrial Mobilization Division. Straightens his tie. Knocks. Inside, a colonel with rimless glasses reads without expression. He does not curse. He does not sigh. He reaches for a pencil and draws a box around one sentence, pressing hard enough to dent the paper. Failure rate increases exponentially without precision bearings. He looks up. Who else has this? The lieutenant hesitates. Detroit. Akron. Seattle. And he checks his notes. Canton, Ohio. The colonel nods once. He already knows the name. Timken. Back in Ohio, the plant manager walks the floor again, slower now. He listens to machines that are running, but not smoothly. Bearings meant to be replaced last month are still in service, cleaned and re-greased, pushed beyond tolerance. Every vibration is a warning. An operator pulls him aside. Sir, he says quietly, if we keep this up, we'll start cracking races. The manager meets his eyes. I know. Cracked races mean scrap. Scrap means lost time. Lost time means more than money now. In a conference room upstairs, a map is unrolled across the table. Not a battlefield map. A supply map. Mines in Sweden. Steel mills in Germany. Shipping lanes across the Atlantic now shadowed by U-boats. Neutral ports closing one by one. A red grease pencil circles a region. Before the war, an executive says, we source specialty steel here. High-carbon chromium alloy. Consistent grain structure. No substitutes. And now, someone asks. Pause. Too long. Now it's under German control. The room absorbs that silently. Ball bearings are unforgiving. They demand steel that can survive immense pressure without deforming, microscopic imperfections that can shatter entire assemblies. You cannot rush metallurgy. You cannot fake crystal structure. And you cannot fight a modern war without rotation. In Detroit, an auto plant supervisor watches an assembly line crawl. Trucks roll forward in fits and starts. Axles squeal. Gearboxes whine. The war in Europe has already doubled demand for vehicles, and now the machines that build them are faltering. In Seattle, a Boeing engineer runs his hand along a half-finished wing assembly. The aircraft is beautiful, rivets flush, skin tight. But its control surfaces are stiff, resistant. Bearings? He asks. The answer comes with a shake of the head. Across the country, the same story unfolds in pieces. Not a collapse. A constriction. Like blood flows slowing in the arteries of an industrial giant. At Timken, the phones do not stop ringing. Every call carries urgency wrapped in politeness. How long? What can you spare? Can we substitute? The answers are never satisfying. In one office, a junior engineer flips through a notebook filled with crossed-out calculations. He stops on a page covered in dense equations and circles one word twice. Redesign. He looks up. If we can reduce steel mass per bearing without sacrificing load rating? A senior engineer cuts him off. You're talking about rewriting decades of proven design. Under pressure. With no margin for error. Yes, the junior says. I am. Silence follows. In the plant cafeteria, men eat without appetite. Forks scrape trays. Conversations drift, then die. Everyone feels it, the sense that something small is tightening around something vast. A radio in the corner murmurs news from Europe. German troops maneuvering near the French border. British shipping losses in the North Atlantic. The announcer's voice is calm, controlled. The war feels far away. But the shortage does not. At noon, a telegram arrives at Timken headquarters marked urgent. It is from a naval procurement officer. Destroyer program threatened by bearing delays. Request immediate mitigation plan. The executive who reads it folds the paper carefully, as if neatness might impose order on the problem. He stands and walks to the window. From here the factory looks immense. Solid. Permanent. He knows better. The United States prides itself on abundance, on the ability to outproduce, outbuild, outlast. But abundance relies on flow. And flow depends on components so small they rarely earn a line in a newspaper. Ball bearings do not inspire parades. They do not get medals. They do not make speeches. But without them nothing moves. By mid-afternoon a decision is forming, not spoken yet, but sensed. Engineers sketch more aggressively. Purchasing agents make calls that would have seemed reckless months ago. Freight schedules are redrawn. Budgets quietly loosen. This is no longer about maintaining output. This is about survival, industrial survival, national survival, before the shooting even starts. In Washington, the colonel sets the folder down on a growing stack of similar reports. He taps the top page once, thoughtfully. If this gets worse, he says to no one in particular, we won't feel it at the front. He looks toward the window, toward the Capitol dome gleaming in the pale spring light. We'll feel it everywhere else first. Back in Canton, as the afternoon shift prepares to take over, a foreman posts a notice on the board. Overtime authorized. Experimental runs approved. Engineering support on the floor at all hours. The men read it quietly. They understand what it means. Timken is about to gamble, on ideas untested, on supply lines uncertain, on speed instead of caution. And once that gamble begins there will be no turning back. The decision no one had tried. March 14, 1940. 11:02 p.m. Canton, Ohio. The lights are still on. From the road, the Timken plant glows like a ship at sea, windows blazing against the dark Ohio night, smokestacks exhaling steadily into cold air. Most factories sleep at this hour. This one does not. Inside, the conference room feels smaller than it did in daylight. Jackets are draped over chairs. Coffee cups ringed with brown stains line the table. Ashtrays overflow. The men around the table have been awake too long to pretend otherwise. An engineer rubs his eyes and turns a blueprint 90 degrees. If we keep sourcing steel the way we always have, he says, we'll be shut down in 6 months. Maybe less. No one argues. Another man, older, slower, with decades of bearing failures catalogued in his memory, leans forward. There is steel in this country, he says carefully. Plenty of it. But it's not bearing steel. He lets the distinction hang in the air. American mills can produce volume. Rails, plates, armor. But ball bearings are different. They require uniformity at a microscopic level. Carbides align just right. Impurities measured in whispers. You change the steel, he continues, you change everything. Heat treatment. Grinding. Load ratings. Fatigue life. The plant manager folds his hands. And if we don't change? The answer comes fast this time. We stop. Silence again. Outside the room, the factory floor is alive with controlled chaos. Experimental batches run through machines normally reserved for proven designs. Engineers stand shoulder to shoulder with machinists, listening to vibrations, watching for chatter, feeling housings with bare hands. One misstep and the bearing fails. Not dramatically. Quietly. A hairline fracture. A microscopic flaw that won't show itself until weeks later, when an axle seizes or a gearbox locks, or an aircraft control stiffens at altitude. Risk doesn't announce itself. Back in the conference room, the youngest man at the table clears his throat. No one looks at him at first. What if we don't wait for perfect steel, he says. Heads turn. What if we make it perfect ourselves? The idea lands heavy. Steelmaking is an industry unto itself. Timken buys steel. It does not refine it. It does not control the melt. That has always been someone else's problem. Until now. You're talking about vertical integration, an executive says slowly. During a crisis. I'm talking about survival, the engineer replies. We experiment. We adjust alloy compositions. We control heat treatment from the start. That takes time, someone says. So does waiting for Europe to ship us steel that may never arrive. The older engineer exhales. If we do this, he says, we'll be betting the company on metallurgy. The room absorbs that. Outside, a machine shrieks, metal on metal, before an operator kills the power. An engineer rushes over. Another failure logged. Another lesson learned the hard way. The plant manager stands. When this war started, he says, Germany didn't just mobilize soldiers. They mobilized factories. They planned for shortages. They planned for isolation. He looks around the table, meeting each pair of tired eyes. If America is dragged into this, he continues, it won't be decided by speeches. It will be decided by whether our machines keep turning. No one interrupts. So here's the question, he finishes. Do we keep asking for steel that won't come, or do we make what we need? The decision is not unanimous. It never is. But it is decisive. Timken will take control of its own steel. The gamble begins quietly. Within days, contracts are signed with domestic mills willing to experiment. New alloy recipes are drafted, variations measured in tenths of a percent. Chromium adjusted. Carbon tweaked. Heat curves redrawn. Test batches arrive at the plant labeled not with names but numbers. Batch 17B fails after 12 hours. Batch 21C warps under load. Batch 29A shows promise, then flakes. Each failure teaches something. Grain too coarse. Quench too fast. Temper too short. The learning curve is steep, unforgiving. On the floor, machinists feel the difference immediately. Wheels bite differently. Sparks change color. A grinder operator squints at a shower of light and mutters, "That's not right." He's right. Bearings are pulled from test rigs and cut open. Magnified. Studied like crime scenes. Engineers argue over fractures measured in microns. Meanwhile, the pressure does not ease. Telegrams arrive hourly. Aircraft manufacturers. Tank arsenals. Rail companies. Each needs assurances. Each wants priority. There is none to give. In Washington, the Industrial Mobilization Division is now fully alert. Civilian suits replace uniforms in meetings. Words like allocation and standardization begin to circulate. Quietly, the government prepares to intervene if industry cannot solve the problem itself. Timken knows this. Failure will not just cost contracts. It will invite control. Late one night, a test rig hums steadily past the 12-hour mark. Then 16. Then 24. Engineers return from brief naps to find it still running. At 48 hours, someone smiles. At 72, no one speaks. At 100 hours, the rig is stopped. The bearing is removed. Cleaned. Inspected. No spalling. No cracks. No deformation. The room exhales as one. It's not perfect, the older engineer says. But it's viable. Viable is enough. Production ramps cautiously. These bearings are not yet trusted for aircraft or warships, but trucks, conveyors, machine tools. Movement begins again. But the victory is fragile. The steel recipe works at small scale. Scaling it up is another gamble entirely. One uncontrolled furnace. One contaminated melt. One rushed batch under political pressure. And now the world is watching. Because if Timken succeeds, America keeps turning. If it fails, the machines will stop. Everywhere. Pressure from every direction. April 3, 1940. 4:36 a.m. Canton, Ohio. Dawn hasn't arrived yet, but the plant is already vibrating. The night shift bleeds into morning without ceremony. Men trade places at machines with nods instead of words. Faces are gray with fatigue. Coffee is swallowed, not tasted. Somewhere deep in the building, a furnace roars, its heat pushing through brick and steel like a living thing. The experimental bearings are no longer experiments. They're on the line. A clipboard moves from station to station, signatures stacking up in tight, slanted handwriting. Each name carries weight now. Every bearing that passes inspection is another hour of movement regained, another machine that won't fall silent. But outside Timken's walls, patience is wearing thin. In Detroit, executives gather around polished tables, tempers barely restrained. Production schedules slip again. Truck deliveries arrive incomplete. An entire week of output hangs on components measured in inches. We were promised relief, one man snaps. You were promised effort, comes the reply. In Washington, the War Department's tone hardens. Requests become directives. Quiet phone calls turn official. Timken's leadership finds itself answering not just to customers, but to the state. A telegram arrives marked priority, war material. Immediate allocation of bearings required for naval construction. No quantities listed. Just urgency. At the plant, engineers argue over which orders can be filled safely. The new steel holds, but margins are thinner. Tolerance is narrower. A bearing that survives a truck axle may not survive a destroyer's propeller shaft. You don't guess at those stakes. An engineer stands at a test bench, running a finger along a bearing race. We can push output, he says. But we'll be trading certainty for speed. The plant manager looks at the schedule pinned to the wall. Red ink everywhere. Missed dates. Revised promises. We're already doing that, he replies. As word spreads, competitors take notice. Some quietly adopt Timken's methods. Others scoff. Making bearing steel without traditional suppliers is reckless, they say. Unproven. Dangerous. Until they start calling. By mid-April, Timken's phones are ringing with voices that were once rivals. Everyone wants to know the same thing. How did you do it? The answer is not simple. It's nights without sleep. Scrap piles taller than men. Engineers who now know the sound of failure before instruments detect it. Machinists who trust their hands more than gauges. And risk. Immense risk. One contaminated batch could undo everything. It nearly happens on April 17th. A furnace run arrives slightly off-spec. Carbon content just a hair too high. The deviation is small enough that weeks earlier no one would have noticed. Now it's caught. An inspector flags the batch. Production halts. The line freezes. The delay ripples outward instantly. A freight car sits idle on a siding. A truck convoy waits. A factory in Illinois shuts down early. The system is stretched taut. In a closed-door meeting that night, tempers flare. We can't keep stopping like this, an executive says. The country doesn't have time for perfect. And it won't have time for failure either, an engineer snaps back. The argument ends when a messenger enters with another telegram, this one from the Navy. Destroyer launch delayed. Bearings pending. The room goes quiet. Everyone understands what that means. Ships delayed now will be needed later, when there may be no time to catch up. When the Atlantic may no longer be forgiving. The decision is made. The batch is scrapped. Thousands of pounds of steel, destroyed without hesitation. Outside, sparks rain as the metal is cut apart. Wasteful, some would say. Necessary, others no. Because somewhere in the Pacific, Japanese shipyards are running at full tilt. Somewhere in Germany, engineers refine tolerances with ruthless efficiency. Somewhere in Britain, factories rebuild under the threat of air raid sirens. The war is accelerating. America's preparation must match it. By May, Timken's gamble begins to pay off. Output rises, not to pre-crisis levels but close enough to breathe. Bearings flow again into the arteries of industry. Truck plants recover first. Then rail. Then aircraft. At a Boeing facility, a test pilot rolls down a runway. Control surfaces respond smoothly. Somewhere deep in the wings, bearings spin, quiet, perfect. No one cheers. There is no announcement. The work simply continues. But the pressure does not ease. It sharpens. In Washington, a new realization is taking hold. The bearing shortage was not an accident. It was a warning. Modern war does not begin with bombs. It begins with shortages. And now the government wants insurance. Plans are drafted. Stockpiles proposed. Standardized designs discussed. Civilian industry is being mapped, cataloged, quietly prepared for something larger. Timken is suddenly at the center of it all. A delegation arrives from the War Department. Suits, briefcases, serious eyes. They tour the plant, ask pointed questions, take notes. How long can you sustain this? One asks. The plant manager answers honestly. As long as nothing else breaks. That is not reassuring. Because something always breaks. As the men leave, an engineer watches them go, then turns back to the floor. He knows what's coming. Expansion. Scale. Speed. And with speed comes danger. Late that night, another test rig hums under load. Higher load this time. Longer duration. The bearing spins smoothly, then hesitates. Just for a fraction of a second. An engineer leans closer, heart pounding. Is it heat? Lubrication? Steel? If it fails now, the consequences will ripple far beyond this room. The machine whines. Vibrates. And then. The test that couldn't fail. May 22, 1940. 2:14 a.m. Canton, Ohio. The test rig does not care about hope. It does not know about contracts or navies or wars accelerating across oceans. It knows only load, speed, heat. Steel against steel. Rotation without mercy. The bearing hesitates again. Just a whisper of resistance, so small an untrained ear would miss it. But the men around the rig freeze. One engineer raises a hand, palm out, as if stopping traffic. No one speaks. The machine keeps running. A temperature needle creeps upward. Another gauge vibrates at the edge of its acceptable range. Sweat beads on foreheads despite the cool night air. If the bearing seizes now, it won't just mean another failed batch. It will mean the design itself is flawed, unreliable under sustained stress. It will mean everything Timken has staked these past months is built on borrowed time. The older engineer leans in, listening. It's not the race, he murmurs. It's lubrication breakdown. The room exhales just a little. They kill the power carefully. Too fast and heat spikes. Too slow and friction builds. The bearing is removed, gloved hands lifting it like something fragile. Under inspection, the steel holds. No cracks. No spalling. Just discoloration, heat where grease has thinned. A fixable problem. Someone laughs. It's sharp and brief, almost a bark. Then another joins in. Relief moves through the room, quiet but undeniable. By morning, revised lubrication protocols are drafted. New tolerances. New maintenance schedules. Everything is tighter now. More disciplined. There is no room left for guesswork. The breakthrough changes everything. Within weeks, Timken's redesigned bearings, made from domestic steel refined in-house, are approved for higher stress applications. Not all at once. Carefully. Incrementally. First locomotives. Then heavy trucks. Then finally aircraft. A Boeing acceptance officer signs off on a shipment and pauses before leaving. You understand, he says, if these fail in the air. They won't, the Timken engineer replies. Not confidently. Precisely. By summer, the crisis that nearly strangled American industry is no longer visible. Factories hum again. Assembly lines move with familiar rhythm. Newspapers report production numbers climbing, not knowing how close they came to collapse. But behind the scenes, everything has changed. The War Department formalizes relationships that were once informal. Timken is designated critical. Its methods studied, documented, quietly shared. Other manufacturers are pushed, sometimes forced, to adapt similar controls. Standardization begins to replace tradition. In June, France falls. The news crackles over radios in workshops and offices alike. German forces sweep through Paris. The war is no longer distant or theoretical. It is efficient, mechanized, relentless. American planners take note. Germany's success is not just tactical. It is industrial. Fast repairs. Rapid replacement. Continuous motion. All enabled by components that do not fail. That lesson lands hard. By July, new contracts arrive. Bigger, faster, less forgiving. Tank arsenals. Naval yards. Aircraft engine manufacturers. The quantities are staggering. Timken's plant expands, shifts again. New workers are trained at breakneck speed. Engineers become teachers. Manuals are rewritten almost weekly. The gamble is paying off, but it demands constant vigilance. One mistake now could ripple across the entire war economy. And the pressure keeps building. In Washington, a new concern emerges. The bearing shortage was solved, but what if the enemy targets the solution? Intelligence reports hint at German interest in American industrial vulnerabilities. Sabotage is no longer unthinkable. Security tightens. Guards appear at factory gates. IDs are checked. Visitors escorted. Windows that once opened freely are sealed. War has a way of arriving before it's declared. At Timken, the plant manager walks the floor late one evening. He stops beside a young machinist carefully grinding a race, sparks falling in controlled arcs. Ever think about where these go? The manager asks. The machinist shrugs. Trucks, I guess. Planes. Ships too. The machinist nods, then looks up. Sir, do you think we'd have lost it? If we hadn't changed? The manager does not answer right away. He watches the bearing spin under the grinder, perfectly balanced. Yes, he says finally. I think we would have. Autumn approaches. Production climbs higher than it ever was before the crisis. Not because steel magically improved, but because control did. Because America learned, just in time, that abundance without precision is an illusion. But the story is not finished. Because in December 1941, the war will arrive on America's doorstep. And when it does, the demand will not be measured in shortages avoided, but in millions of lives, machines, and moments that depend on rotation without failure. Timken's gamble has bought time. The question now is whether it bought enough. When the war finally arrived. December 7, 1941. 7:55 a.m. Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The sound is not what most people imagine. It is not one explosion or even several. It is a tearing, metal ripped open, fuel igniting, alarms screaming over one another. On Battleship Row, sailors look up just in time to see aircraft marked with red suns banking low against a clear blue sky. America is at war. Within hours, the shockwave reaches the mainland. Not as fire or smoke, but as orders. In Washington, telephones light up. Emergency sessions convene. Production figures that once seemed ambitious are now laughably small. The United States does not need to prepare anymore. It needs to produce. Immediately. Relentlessly. By nightfall, messages are already moving toward Canton, Ohio. At Timken, the Sunday shift has been thin. Maintenance crews. Skeleton staffing. The radio in the tool room crackles with news from Hawaii, and men stop what they're doing to listen. No one speaks. They don't need to. By midnight, the gates are open. Managers arrive half-dressed. Engineers are pulled from dinner tables. Workers are called back from church pews and family homes. The plant comes alive again, this time with purpose sharpened by fear. Within 48 hours, Timken is operating as if the crisis of 1940 never ended, only now the stakes are absolute. There is no neutral buffer. No delay while Congress debates. Everything that turns must turn now. The War Production Board issues its first directives. Civilian production is slashed. Military priority overrides all else. Automobiles give way to tanks. Refrigerators to radar mounts. Sewing machines to aircraft components. And at the center of it all, bearings. Lists arrive detailing requirements so large they feel unreal. Thousands per aircraft. Tens of thousands per ship. Millions across the war economy. Timken's early gamble suddenly looks prophetic. Because while other manufacturers scramble, redesigning under fire, learning lessons too late, Timken is already there. Its steel process is proven. Its inspection protocols hardened by years of near failure. They don't need to invent under pressure. They need to scale. New plants are authorized almost overnight. Equipment is requisitioned. Skilled workers are deferred from the draft and rerouted to factory floors. Women step into roles once considered unreachable: learning, grinding, inspection, heat treatment. The machines do not care who runs them, only how well. By early 1942, Timken bearings are everywhere, though no one sees them. In the landing gear of B-17s lifting heavy over England. In the turret rings of Sherman tanks rolling across North Africa. In the shafts of destroyers cutting through Atlantic swells hunting submarines. Each one spins silently. Each one must not fail. Engineers track reports obsessively. Every field failure is logged, analyzed, traced back to batch, furnace, shift. Feedback loops tighten further. War accelerates learning. There is no pride left, only responsibility. At one point, a naval report flags premature wear in a small percentage of shipboard bearings. Timken engineers work for 72 hours straight, isolating the cause to lubrication breakdown under tropical conditions. A fix is issued within days. Ships sail on time. The enemy never knows how close that weakness came to being fatal. As the war expands, so does the understanding of what nearly happened in 1940. Internal government memos circulate, classified, dry, devastating. Had the bearing shortage persisted, U.S. mobilization would have been delayed by months. Possibly longer. Months that would have meant lost convoys, lost skies, lost lives. No parades are held for that near miss. But planners remember. By 1943, American production astonishes the world. Not just in volume, but in reliability. Machines run longer, break less, can be repaired in the field. Rotation without hesitation. Germany, once dominant in precision manufacturing, begins to feel the strain. Allied bombing targets bearing plants deliberately. Schweinfurt burns. Production falters. The irony is not lost on American analysts. They know exactly how fragile that link is. Timken's engineers study captured bearings late in the war, cutting them open, measuring wear. Some are excellent. Others rushed. Some brittle from inferior steel. Precision, they learn again, cannot be faked indefinitely. In 1944, as Allied forces land in Normandy, the industrial effort behind them is immense and invisible. Landing craft winch systems. Artillery traverse gears. Aircraft control assemblies. All spinning. All dependent. When the war ends in 1945, Timken does not celebrate loudly. It simply slows. Gradually. Carefully. War contracts wind down. Civilian production returns. But the company is not the same. Neither is America. The lesson learned before the war, learned just barely in time, has become doctrine. Control your supply. Master the small things. Never assume abundance equals security. Ball bearings return to obscurity. Back to footnotes. Back to anonymity. But they carry a quiet legacy. Because when the United States faced an invisible chokehold, before the first bomb fell, it was not tanks or planes that nearly failed it. It was something small enough to fit in your hand. And one bold risk, taken in 1940, ensured that when the war finally came, America's machines did not stop. They turned. They endured. They won. The legacy hidden in plain sight. August 15, 1945. 11:01 a.m. Canton, Ohio. The siren is different this time. Not the sharp, urgent cry of a shift change or an emergency stop, but long, sustained, almost unsure of itself. It rolls across the factory roof and out into the city, echoing off brick buildings and quiet streets. Japan has surrendered. On the factory floor, machines slow, then stop. Men and women straighten up from their stations, hands still resting on steel that has not yet cooled. Some remove their gloves. Some don't. For a moment, no one knows what to do next. Then someone claps. Another joins in. Soon the sound spreads. Applause, cheers, laughter breaking through years of tension held too tightly for too long. A few workers sit down where they stand. Others stare at the floor, overwhelmed not by joy but by release. The war is over. But the machines tell a different story. They are worn now. Bearings replaced and replaced again. Inspection charts fill entire filing cabinets. Processes refined until there is nothing left to remove without risking failure. This factory, like thousands of others, has been pushed to its absolute limit. And it survived. In offices upstairs, executives gather around radio sets, listening to the official announcement. There are handshakes, quiet smiles. No speeches. They know something most people never will. Victory was not just forged in battlefields and skies. It was forged here. In tolerances. In alloy percentages. In decisions made years earlier before the nation even accepted it would fight. The gamble of 1940 now feels distant. Almost inevitable in hindsight. But it was nothing of the sort. Internal reports circulate through government channels in the months after the war. Lessons learned. Vulnerabilities identified. Recommendations formalized. At the top of more than one document is a familiar phrase. Single-point industrial failures. Ball bearings become a case study. Not because they are glamorous, but because they are essential. Because they nearly stopped everything without firing a single shot. In the post-war years, America reorganizes its industrial thinking. Stockpiles are created. Redundancy encouraged. Vertical integration no longer seen as inefficiency but insurance. Timken expands, globally now. Its steel operations remain in-house. Its quality standards become benchmarks. Engineers who learned under wartime pressure train a new generation who will never know that fear. To the public, bearings remain invisible. You don't notice them when a train accelerates smoothly. When an elevator glides upward. When an engine hums without complaint. You only notice when they fail. And they rarely do anymore. In Germany, investigators pore over the ruins of Schweinfurt and other bombed factories, tallying the impact. The conclusion is stark. Once precision manufacturing collapses, recovery is nearly impossible under fire. America had been one missed shipment away from learning that lesson firsthand. In 1950, during the Korean War, production ramps up again, fast, controlled, confident. There is no bearing crisis this time. The systems built in the shadow of World War II hold. The small things are protected now. Years later, a retired Timken engineer walks the floor as a guest, slower, careful where once he moved fast. He stops beside a modern grinding machine, automated, enclosed, precise beyond anything he worked with in 1940. A young operator explains the process, unaware of the history beneath his feet. The old man smiles. He remembers when they learned the hard way that precision is not optional. That risk, when chosen deliberately, can save more than it costs. Outside, the world has moved on. New wars. New technologies. New fears. But deep inside every modern machine, military or civilian, the lesson still turns quietly. Because power does not come from size alone. It comes from the smallest parts doing exactly what they are supposed to do, every single time. The smallest turning point. November 3, 1949. 8:42 a.m. Washington, D.C. The room is quiet except for the rustle of paper. A congressional subcommittee listens as an industrial analyst clears his throat and begins to speak. There are no photographs. No charts dramatic enough for headlines. Just a measured voice recounting a near failure most Americans never knew existed. In 1940, he says, the United States nearly lost its ability to mobilize before it ever entered the war. Several heads lift. The analyst continues. Not from lack of manpower. Not from lack of money. But from a shortage of precision components, specifically ball bearings. Pause. The word sounds almost absurd in this setting. Senators accustomed to debating fleets and divisions shift slightly in their chairs. But the report is thorough. Timelines. Production curves. Internal memos now declassified. It shows how close the system came to stalling. How weeks of delay could have become months. How months could have altered entire campaigns. The conclusion is simple. Modern power is fragile. After the hearing, the report is filed away. Another lesson recorded. Another warning archived. It will be cited quietly in future planning documents, echoed in defense contracts, embedded in industrial policy. And then it will fade. That is how these things go. Back in Canton, Ohio, the Timken plant runs on a peacetime schedule now. The pace is calmer. The urgency controlled. But the habits remain. Inspection is still ruthless. Steel recipes still guarded. Assumptions still questioned. The men and women who worked through the crisis of 1940 are older now or gone. But their decisions have hardened into process, into doctrine. New engineers learn not just how bearings are made, but why they are never taken for granted. Because somewhere in the archives of the company, there are notebooks filled with crossed-out equations, heat curves drawn by hand, margins crowded with late-night revisions. They are reminders. The war proved something fundamental, not just about industry but about civilization itself. Complex systems fail at their smallest points. Empires don't collapse when the front gate falls. They collapse when maintenance stops. When supply lines thin. When tiny tolerances are ignored. Germany learned this lesson from the air. Japan learned it at sea. America learned it in time. And it learned it quietly. No monument stands for the bearing shortage of 1940. No plaque marks the nights when engineers slept on factory floors, or the moments when entire batches of steel were destroyed to prevent future disaster. There are no medals for stopping a catastrophe that never happened. But the impact is everywhere. In every post-war factory designed with redundancy. In every military contract that demands multiple suppliers. In every planner who asks, what happens if this part disappears? The question echoes into the modern world. Satellites depend on bearings that must spin for decades without failure. Jet engines rotate at speeds unimaginable in 1940. Power grids rely on components that, if they seize, plunge cities into darkness. The lesson has not aged. Only the machines have changed. And still, the smallest parts matter most. Somewhere, right now, a bearing spins inside a machine you depend on. You don't hear it. You don't see it. You never think about it. That silence is not accidental. It is the product of a decision made under pressure before the world was ready, by people who understood that stopping failure is as important as winning battles. In 1940, America did not run out of courage. It nearly ran out of precision. One company took a risk most believed was too bold, too fast, too dangerous. And because of that risk, because of steel refined to perfection, because of standards enforced without compromise, when the moment came, the machines kept turning. And when machines turn, armies move. When armies move, wars are decided. Not always by the loudest weapons, but by the quiet parts that never fail.